Chapter 2. The Final Battle. The masses knew him as Dr. Felix Antiworld, a fine name no matter what anybody said. He adjusted his tie in the parabolic mirror he'd propped against a column. A bow tie, naturally, not the silken leash the rulers of the world knotted around the throats of their dead-eyed, pen-pushing subordinates. He was a scientist. Scientists were gifts to humanity. Scientists wore bow ties. Satisfied the colorful bow overshadowed his white collar, he swept away from the mirror, ready for the fight of his life. "This time," he announced to an empty lobby, "I'm ready for him." If he was honest with himself, he'd admit the old train station made for a poor laboratory, particularly after he'd filled it with garbage. Mostly the husks of ordinary devices, air conditioners, auto transmissions, microwaves, and computers, shelled like oysters and harvested of valuable parts. The space had a lot of sharp edges and required careful footing to get anywhere. But it was all part of the perfect plan, and it came with the biggest imaginable payoff. At long last, he was going to kill Advent 9. That was the real reason for tonight's experiment. He didn't really believe the police would return his old inventions, though they were worth having. The anti-gravity generator, the cold fusion hyperanodes, the FTL telescope, the lightning-shooting satellite, and the flask housing the nanobot planet were all extraordinary things by anyone's standard. But Dr. Antiworld had outgrown the extraordinary. What he'd achieved in this abandoned corner of the city was the impossible. "People won't use that word any more when I'm done," he muttered. "After tonight, nothing will be impossible." Holding his breath, he glanced at his greatest creation. The biconcave was full of endlessly churning shapes moving through a black tempest. This was a small one, no larger than a storage shed. It hovered in a perfect sphere, unsupported above the ring-like shackle generating it. In its fathoms he saw the silhouettes of animals, trees, flowers, and human faces. They flashed into focus, blue and violet rising from the black, before dissolving into noise, rejoining the storm. It was terrifying enough to be beautiful. But he didn't have time to get lost in the show. He'd seized the airwaves. His message was playing in every corner of Hearth City. It could only be minutes before the boy found his way here. That boy, he thought, cradling his skull. A headache was coming on. Advent 9 was a never-ending pain. It had been 6 years since the doctor's once illustrious winning streak had been ruined by a child in fancy pajamas. The boy should have been easy prey for a man of his intellect, but the boy always escaped death, much as the doctor always escaped capture. It defied reason, and nothing would change so long as they kept stalemating each other. Tonight would be different. The doctor couldn't say with scientific certainty that all would change for the better, but things would change. They would never return to the way they had been. Not after it woke up. He laid a hand on the machine's central console, checking metrics. The 5 throttles were safely on the lowest setting. Temperature was within the ideal range. Gravitation was stable. Feeling confident, Dr. Antiworld turned one dial a touch to the right. The biconcave reacted. Swirling clouds coalesced, and a large black form rose from the depths. A faceless, fingerless mannequin resting on spread knees. It stirred, rocking its head and twitching away from the lights inside the train station. The struggle was short. After a moment, it slumped again, asleep. "Patience," Dr. Antiworld whispered, as much to himself as to it. The sphere could not be safely opened until Advent 9 arrived. Dr. Antiworld faced the immense front doors, waiting. The station's wiring was beyond repair, so he'd brought his own lighting. Construction lamps with halogen bulbs had turned night into day. They exposed the boarded windows, rafters splotched with rust, and cracks in the walls. Mortar oozed between orange bricks, and sheets of spider webs wrapped the iron handrails on the stairs, their fat architects dangling inside. Not the best laboratory, but a damned good lair. As an afterthought, the doctor slapped a hand on his lab coat pocket and felt the rounded outline of his vanishing ray. The gun ensured an easy getaway. He wouldn't need it tonight, but it relieved him to see it carried a full charge. He could stay unseen for weeks if necessary. Calm now, he kept unblinking eyes on the door. 12, 11, 10. The doors buckled with a sound like gunfire. The metal beam holding them cracked. The next knock threw one door, thick as a bulwark, off its hinges. It slapped the floor, and the building resonated with the impact. A stranger might have mistaken Advent 9 for some kind of robot. With metallic lenses on his eyes, a mask covering almost his entire head, and stiff posture, he appeared less than human. His hands and mouth were exposed, but those were inflexible and clenched. That chin was hairless, but he was taller than the doctor. A scientific guess would place him at 15 or 16 years old, not that it mattered. His almost entirely white costume soaked up the dust of the station. The boy was a magnet for filth. Dr. Antiworld dipped his head, the last respectful gesture he would pay to his enemy. "Stay here," Advent 9 mentally commanded the hummingbirds before plunging through the sawdust cloud that was rising from the fallen door. 8 of the creatures unexpectedly obeyed, clinging to the building's brick face. The remaining 3 followed him inside. They flew in strict formation until anything caught their interest. The ravaged doors distracted one. Another bolted to the roof and weaved through the rafters. The last ignored everything else and took a threatening jab at the old man. Dr. Antiworld seemed unaware of the hummingbird. He looked exactly like what he was. With bloodshot eyes that didn't blink, a psychotically clownish bow tie, and a starched lab coat, he was practically wearing a sign that screamed "Mad Scientist." The wiry white tufts on his scalp did nothing to temper the image. Even the way he cleared his throat sounded wicked. "I don't suppose you thought of sneaking through a window. Those original doors were irreplaceable." The one hummingbird tried to scratch his eyes, but Dr. Antiworld walked through the attacks as if the animal wasn't there. "You're being stupid," Advent 9 said. "I'm here to fight you. You expected me to ring the doorbell?" "I was polite enough to send an invitation. Was it too much to ask that you return the favor?" "You're holding the city hostage." "Which justifies your rudeness how?" Advent 9 hissed. "Whatever you're using to hijack the airwaves is sending a signal. Once the police track it, they'll find you." "That would work if the signal was coming from here. The police won't be joining us tonight. If anyone is outnumbered, it's you. In fact, it's only fair I give you an opportunity to leave and— Hey!" Advent 9 ran through the columns to the nearest line of scrap metal and leaped. A small keypad flicked from the doctor's sleeve. He crunched a button. Advent 9 felt a rush of wind. Something fell from the rafters. The hero caught it before it flattened him, but was forced to his knees, which slammed the floor hard enough to send a few broken machines bouncing. Seeing stars, he looked up to discover what he was holding. It was a concrete girder, much like the ones that held up freeway bridges. Broad as a sidewalk, it had fallen 2 stories, pinning him to the floor. "You know what's the worst part of being your nemesis?" the doctor taunted. "There are many examples to choose from, but the one that really bites is how unremarkable you are." Advent 9 grunted. The immense weight settled on his shoulders, and he shrank in its shadow. Don't get me wrong. You are technically superhuman. I've seen you lift cars and uproot street lamps, but compared to the heroes from the old comic books, you're nothing spectacular. For Apollo's sake, how could I have been stopped so many times by someone so ordinary? The concrete beam was too heavy to throw, and Advent 9 couldn't move without dropping it on himself. Grinding his teeth, he lifted it enough to get one foot on the ground. Gah! Try not to void your bowels, the doctor mocked. This place is filthy enough. He gazed around the room. You remember the last time we were both here? You were a lot cuter then. Advent 9 remembered. He'd never admit it, but there had been a time when he'd been afraid of the doctor. The man had blown up a prison, poisoned the mayor, shot down the president's plane, and buried a woman alive. That first fight had been an accident. It had been a rainy day, and he'd picked the wrong roof to hide under, never suspecting that a killer lurked inside. Yeah, Advent 9 replied. This place has gotten older and uglier. Like you. Gaining both feet, he levered himself and stood, shrugging the massive I-beam off his back. It landed with a crash and sank an inch into the brick floor. Advent 9 stepped forward. You're only hurting yourself by attacking me, the doctor warned. I'm giving you a big hint. It might save your life. Advent 9 kept advancing. No? Well, don't expect me to apologize. The doctor hit another button. This time Advent 9 glimpsed the danger before it hit him. Sentry guns descended from the ceiling, barrels already spinning. Shit! This was nothing like a thug firing at him in an open street. A symphony of gunfire converged on the hero. A subtle change of air pressure warned him before each bullet hit. He fuzzed around each one, but had no time to rest between shots. The guns had eyes. They swiveled when he moved, following as he flashed from one spot to another. Their fire threw up volleys of brick shrapnel sharp enough to pierce flesh. In seconds, he had to dodge those, too. The floor grew rutted as masonry dissolved under spraying lead. After a minute, it ended. Thundering bullets became snaps of empty chambers. Muzzles glowed red. The guns raised back into the rafters without a sound. Did you, Advent 9 puffed and wheezed, trying to stay on his feet, forget how fast I am? The doctor grunted as if just noticing him. Oh, your second power, reflexive speed. It's useful for short distances. Very short. But when we consider your running speed, slower than many boys your age, it's a wash, wouldn't you agree? Sweat clamped Advent 9's mask to his face. Brick slivers clung to his uniform, and the station's air rippled with heat. The doctor approached him and glowered. The hero sucked each breath, lungs burning. Dr. Antiworld laughed. And what help is great speed without great endurance? If only the world knew what a wimp you really are. He shook his head. I've made up my mind. You've had enough chances to walk away. If you try to leave now, I'll kill you while your back is turned. A hummingbird snapped at the doctor's ankles, angry enough but not solid enough to raise his bones. Advent 9 spat sweat off his lips and straightened, glaring at the shorter man. Your talent for killing people does not make you dangerous to me. I didn't start any of this. I wanted to be left alone. You called me here. I'm tired, and I'm bored. If you want to live to see tomorrow, stop fighting and return my radio. The doctor chuckled. You missed the radio? That's why you're here? I was listening. Advent 9 put hardness into his voice, but the old man just rolled his eyes. You want to kill me because I turned off your rock music, the doctor snorted. Kids never change. Advent 9 took a swing. His fist almost clipped the doctor's nose off. The man hopped clear, stunned. He scrambled backward while Advent 9 socked his way through the station. The doctor ducked behind bulky machines. Advent 9 smashed them with his fists and flew over the jagged metal the old man tiptoed through. The fight moved crookedly through the clutter, heading for the lobby's center where the hero would end this. The madman jumped a desk, throwing papers like dandelion seeds. Advent 9 burst through the snow and pinned his enemy against the tallest pillar, pressing his shoulders to the bricks. "All right," the doctor said. "You've beaten me again. Should have known better than to cross you. Sure learned my lesson. From now on, I'll dedicate my life to building hospitals." Advent 9 gasped. "Holy crap. Really?" The doctor blinked. "No," he spat. "Shish! I can't imagine how many brain tumors you got in there, boy, but Asclepius himself couldn't heal you." The hero tightened his grip. "I'm not stupid." "Maybe, but you're not smart enough to realize where you're standing." "Huh?" "Look behind you." Advent 9's eyes didn't move. Of course the doctor wanted him to look away. It was the oldest trick in history. Freeing one hand, the hero ready to punch. Thump. "Gah!" the doctor cried out, but Advent 9 hadn't moved. His raised knuckles remained in the air, quivering. Thump. It came from above and behind him, loud and quiet, as if made with great force but far away. It sounded dangerous. Dr. Antiworld craned his neck, peering around Advent 9's head. "That's a good boy," he muttered. Advent 9 followed the doctor's gaze, keeping one hand on his prisoner. He hadn't noticed it before, but behind him was pure darkness, a giant black bubble hovering above a sinister machine, as if the starless night had found its way indoors. Inside was a person, struggling and flailing against everything surrounding him. Thump! A hand crashed against the inside of the bubble-like sphere. Thump! It clawed the surface aimlessly. Thump! It rubbed its eyes, and the mouth quivered before opening in a silent roar. Thump! 4 hummingbirds gathered around the bubble, curious, prodding it with their snouts. Thump! They scattered in alarm like pondfish in a rainstorm. Thump! 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 Advent 9 reeled toward the doctor, pointing at the figure in darkness. "What is that?" The doctor smiled. He brought his mouth to Advent 9's ear. "That," he whispered, "is you."